So the majority of you, I'm guessing, are probably getting ready to start your coursework, or you might have already had a look at it and thought, ooh, what's this sort of thing. So if you just want to pop in the chat box, if you could, what module it is that you're doing. So what module are you studying for? And if you've even started your coursework, just pop in that you've started it. That'd be really good to know as well. Because what we are going to do as well, Lily's going to do this for me, is give you all free access for the weekend to the course that you're studying on our on-demand revision platform. So, oh, okay, lots of different ones. Haven't started yet. Lots of MO5s, lots of those. MO5, M81, M92. Okay, cool. Started, but not much. It's the hardest part, that I think, for the coursework, is getting that pen to paper for that first little bit. I think is the trickiest part. So hopefully you can see my screen. Can everyone see that? Is that all right? Yeah, excellent. So this session is about how to approach that coursework. We're going to look at what the questions look like, the marking scheme, pull apart the questions as well. That's some of the things that the CII are going to ask you to do, and what they actually mean when they say that, because sometimes you look at it and you think, well, what is it they want me to do? So we're going to get to the bottom of that for you. Oops. So I don't know why I put my picture on here, because you can see me. But I'm Emma. If you've been to an Empower Development webinar before, you might not have seen me yet. You might have maybe been with Samantha Ridgewell. I've been at Empower for a few weeks now. I'm not new to CII delivery. It's my background. So please add me on LinkedIn. I'm always open to having new connections. The more the merrier. I share quite a lot of stuff that we're doing here. So the webinars that we've got on, any freebies we've got, I share all sorts of stuff. So link in with me there. Also, I've got a Instagram and TikTok. So please follow those as well. I share quite a lot of exam tips, study tips on there. Anything that I think, oh, that's useful, I'll post it on the social media stuff. So follow those as well. And yeah. So from what I can see from the list, everyone's doing diploma modules. There isn't anyone doing ACII yet. So at the diploma level that you're at now, you've probably already seen that there's quite a big difference between the certificate level and the diploma level. So at this level, you move into a more hybrid approach, which is your coursework and examination. Okay. So now really the CII are testing your knowledge of the study text and how you can apply that to different scenarios. Okay. So with the ACII, when you get to that point, you'll still be required to demonstrate your knowledge from the book, but they will expect you to do some wider research. They might want you to discuss the business that you work in, talk about some real life scenarios relating to the business that you work, and sort of feed all that in. Whereas at this level now, we're just sort of starting to explore that, applying that knowledge of the book to a scenario that they're giving you. So you might have downloaded your question paper from the CII, and on the question paper, they do tend to give you sort of a scenario. So what they're wanting you to do is find all the principles out of the book and apply them to that scenario. So all the answers that you need to write that coursework are going to be in that book. Okay. I will talk a little bit about wider reading a little bit later on, because it's not necessary, but it's something that I like to do anyway, purely because sometimes I'll read something in the book and I'll think, that doesn't make sense. So I'll need to go away and do a bit more reading somewhere else to try and develop a deeper understanding of a topic. So that's where I find wider reading and research most useful, really. So in the table here, with the diploma, with the coursework, there's going to be a word count, okay? Typically 10 to 12,000. I think the majority of the modules are between 8 to 10. Please correct me if I'm wrong. However, the MO5 module is a little bit different. That goes up to 12,000 words for the coursework. You've got quite a lot of case law and things like that in the MO5, so it might be a bit wordier. So you get an extra bit of word count there. It looks like a lot of words. You think 10,000 words, like this is like dissertation, it's so long, it's just going to take me so long to write this. But you'll be really surprised how quickly that adds up. And a lot of students, I found, really struggle to stay under that word count because there's always so much that you want to talk about. So the word count doesn't include diagrams, which is worth noting. So if you're struggling with your word count, using a diagram is a really good way to sum up your point without using your word count. But if you put a table into your assignment, then your word count does count in that. So it's just diagrams where that's deducted. The CII are really strict with the word counts. There's a 10% margin. So if you go over 10% more than the word count, they will just simply stop marking. And I'm sure you've seen on your question papers, the last two questions are the ones with the highest marks. They're 30-mark questions, so you don't want to lose any points from those. So it's really important to stay within the word count. So the format, like I said before, if you've seen your question paper, you've probably already got a feel for what that format's going to look like. You've got 10 questions ranging from 10 marks to 30 marks. The first question is usually a 10 marker, split up into maybe A and B or A, B and C, with marks allocated. We're going to go over that in a few slides to break that down. And then the final two questions and the meaty ones, they're 30 markers. You just got to try not to lose your momentum and your energy by that point, because they put the biggest scoring questions at the end of the coursework, and by that point everyone's like, oh, I've had enough of this now. So just keep going, because you need to get through those final two big marker questions. So the timings of the coursework, this is a question that we get asked quite a lot, is how long should this take me to do? There isn't a right answer to that. You know, everyone's situation is different. The CII, though, give you 6 months to do it. So it has to be done within 6 months. So they give you a deadline. But typically, I'd probably look at structuring it so you're completing within a couple of months, maybe 3 months. And it's just really important to make sure that you don't leave it to the last minute in case something goes wrong, you have some technical difficulties, or you get the dates wrong. Just give yourself enough time. And then it gives you some time as well just to sort of sit and read through the coursework and digest it and make sure that you're happy with it and you're not rushing right at the end. I would book the exam just after you've submitted the coursework, purely because you've got to go through that book cover to cover to write the coursework. So there's no better way for you to revise for your exam than to write the coursework. So if you did the exam first, you'd have to read the whole book to do your exam, and then probably read it again to do your coursework. So doing the coursework is great revision for that exam. And if you leave sort of a big gap between your coursework and the exam, you might find that you have to go back and go over old ground again. So just do it straight away, get it out of the way. So pass marks, 120 out of 200, 60%, it's not bad. Bit of room, bit of wiggle room there. Self-marking is a great exercise to do as well. I do this quite a lot. So if I've written an answer for a question, I'll pretend that I'm the person who's marking it at the CII and go through it and just see how much would I mark myself. I'm very critical anyway, so would I give myself the full 10 marks? If it's no, then I know I need to do a little bit more work. So that's a good sort of exercise to do before you submit your coursework. Does anyone have any questions about those sections? I mean, we are going to go into those in a little bit more detail before I move on. Okay. So learning outcomes. I picked M92 and M05. M92 is my favourite module, and M05 because it's a little bit different than the other ones in terms of structuring your answers. Okay, so learning outcomes. This is how the coursework is structured in relation to the book. So you probably remember learning outcomes from the certificate modules, and you probably remember they're not always as straightforward as learning outcome 1 is chapter 1. Yeah, it's not always that easy, unfortunately. So you can see here, learning outcome 1 in M92. That is definitely chapter 1. Great, really straightforward, brilliant. However, if we get to learning outcome 6, this is chapters 7 and 8. So it's really important when you're doing your coursework, you usually have question 1, learning outcome 1 in little brackets it usually has, not just taking that learning outcome means the chapter number. So always going back to your book and checking that which chapter do I need to read to answer this question. Okay. A learning outcome is basically the information that the CII want you to know enough of to pass the module. Okay, and as you can see here, learning outcomes can occasionally go over more than one chapter. Okay. And I find that this is a really good way to structure how you're going to study. So, like I said earlier on, the hardest thing is starting the coursework. Where do I start? What do I do? I've got the book. Do I need to read it? Now, if you read that book cover to cover and then started your coursework, you're just going to end up reading it again. I personally don't really see the point in that. So I would look at this and think, right, I'm doing question 1. This is about chapter 1. So I need to read chapter 1. I'm not going to worry about the rest of the book right now, because that can wait. That can wait until these questions. I don't need to worry about it. Let's just get this first question out of the way. So read chapter 1. The answer to question 1 is going to be in that chapter. And then once I've done it, I've read chapter 1 and I've completed one question of my coursework. Move on to question 2. I need to read chapters 2 and 3. I've finished this now. So I've done question 1 and question 2, and I've also read 3 chapters of the book. And just carry on like that, because then by the time you get to question number 8, you've read the whole book and you've done 8 questions of your coursework. Yeah. These questions are a little bit different. The ones with all the marks, 30 marks. They're across more than one chapter, but that'll be okay by the time you get to that point, because you've read the book, so it's fine. So the answers that you give in this section will be from across, the chapters. Okay. With MO5, it is a little bit different. You can see a lack of chapter 1 in there. If anyone's read chapter 1 of MO5, you probably understand why there's a lack of it. It's quite a random chapter, I found. But chapter 1 will only come into play for questions 9 and 10 here. So you will have to go through that chapter to answer those 2 questions. So question 1 relates to chapter 2 for MO5. So it's definitely not as straightforward as question 1, learning outcome 1. Yeah. So this table is in the specimen coursework. I'll show you where that is. I'll share my screen with you in a little bit and show you where that is, because it's a really useful document you should have a look at. And this table is something that you should refer to a lot, because it's really useful and it tells you, you know, where you need to get the answers from for that question. So it's really important. I'm going to show you where that is now, actually. Let me just share my screen, my other screen. Excuse me. Okay, hopefully you can see that CII page there. Yeah, excellent. So this is just the CII website. If you go to your qualifications, qualifications tab, go to diploma and then to whatever module it is that you study in. So MO5, M92, whatever it might be. And in here, you have a specimen coursework assignment. So this document is really useful. Keep this, download it to your desktop, because you will keep referring to this. Okay. There's so much guidance in here, especially if you've never written an assignment before. If you didn't go to uni, so you've never had, that experience of writing a dissertation, or you might have been out of education for a long time. This is really useful for that. They list the rules for the coursework. We'll go through most of these anyway, but they are useful to go over. Give you some top tips of how to answer the questions, read the learning outcomes. We've already sort of reiterated that, haven't we? And we'll go through some of the other tips as well. So they give you some additional MO5 coursework tips, because like I said before, MO5 is a little bit different with it being the law module. So they give you steps on how you should answer the question. So because you're applying legal thoughts, the process is a little bit different to M92, because we want to come to our own decision of the legal concept that we're applying. So the first step you should think about when you're answering a question for MO5 is identifying the legal concept. So finding the right chapter, what legal concept is it that this question is referring to. Step 2 is about explaining. So you want to explain the law in question. What does that legislation mean? Step 3 is applying. So apply any principles, statutes. This is the point where you talk about case law. What case laws are relevant to this situation or scenario that's in the question. This is where your extra word count's going to come in really handy. And then finally, step 4 is your conclusion. Might be some grey areas with MO5. It's not always black and white with legislation, and that's okay. You can include sort of ifs and buts in your answers, just to show that, you've thought of all the different avenues and all the different angles. And I really encourage you to show that you've really thought about your answers from every angle, because it really shows you develop that deeper understanding of the legislations and case laws. Okay. You can apply this concept to most of the modules, but insurance law, you should definitely follow these steps for sure. So this is the table we were looking at before. And then it gives you a specimen coursework paper. Now, you're not going to find the answers to your coursework in here, unfortunately. They don't make it that easy. But it will help you see, how am I supposed to structure this? Because that's one thing that I struggled with. I was like, what's it supposed to look like? So you can see, you know, there's an A and B in your question. Just put A and B and put your answers in. You've got to remember that there's a real person, a human being who's going to read your coursework. You want to make it as easy for them as possible, and make all your information really clear. Yeah, so don't be afraid to use lists. Use an A and a B to make sure that you're pointing them in the right direction. Use bullet points. If it wants you to list something, just use 1, 2, 3 and list it. You know, it doesn't have to be fancy pants. It can just be really straightforward, make it simple. Yeah. So it gives a good overview of how to answer and how to structure the questions. Scroll through these questions all the way to the end. We're nearly there. These are the big markers now. So at the end, here, it gives you sort of the thought process behind the question and the key things to note and how you should plan your answer. So it deconstructs the question for you and gives you an answer plan. I think that's really useful, and you can apply that to your own questions. And it highlights the main words in there. We're going to go through these main words and what they actually mean, a bit of a glossary. So when it says explain, you know, how much information do they want? It's a 4-mark question, so probably not very much. You know, you should bear that in mind. And we're going to look at that now. The question weighting. Okay, has anyone got any questions about that document? Or are you quite happy where to find that? Just on the CII website. All happy? Is everyone okay so far? Yeah, I see you all nodding. Okay. Back to slideshow. Oops. Okay. So the weighting of marks. So like I mentioned before, the CII do give you a little bit of guidance on how many marks they're awarding for each section, which is really useful because it tells you how much you need to write effectively. So if there's parts A and B, so in this case, for this question, there's A, B and C, answer them separately. So like you saw in that specimen paper, you can write a little introduction, I suppose, a little introductory opening, and then go A and then put your answer, and then B and then your answer. So split them up just so it's very clear. And where a question requires you to address several items, the marks available for each of them are equally weighted. So for example, if 4 things are required and the question's worth 12 marks, each item is worth 3 marks. Yeah. So you can see here, explain the 6 most important actions that could be taken to reduce customer complaints when considering each of the 3 lines of defence. So you've got to do 6 for each of the 3 lines of defence. So this is really important to pick out these key words and really plan and make sure that you're putting enough information in to cover that. Okay. So the next one here, you've got 2 management controls that underwriting could use and 2 management controls that claims could use. And this is 4. So you're getting a mark for each of those controls. Yeah. So you just break it down. You know how much information you need to put in. And this is identify with justification. So not only do you need to tell them what management control you would use, you need to tell them why. You need to justify how and why you've come to that decision. Okay, so you have to ensure that the length and the breadth of each answer you feel matches that marks available. Okay, and sometimes it's quite easy because you can, especially if it's asking you to list something, you can count, like, have I got, want 6, so 1, 2, 3, have I got enough of those? Sorry, there's just a question now I'll just pick up. So for question A in this example, would you do 2 for each line of defence to get to 6, or just choose 6 that relate to any? I would do for each line of defence. So explain the 6 most important actions when considering each of the 3 lines of defence. So I would pick 6 important actions, but then relate those same actions to every line of defence. Okay, does that make sense? So you pick the 6 and then explain how they relate to each line of defence. So 6 into 3. I hope that makes sense. I don't know if I explained that very well. Thank you, Alex. Okay. The key thing as well is just make sure you don't overdo it. You've got a word count you need to stay within. Just really focus on what it is that you're being marked for. They're not going to give you extra marks for any fluff that you put in. So just make sure it's just to the point. Yeah. Has anyone got any questions about the weighting of the marks? It's okay, Kerry. I'm recording it anyway, so you can find it on the YouTube channel. Okay, so just a bit of a recap. Read those learning outcomes in advance. Ensure you cover all the sections relating to the learning outcome. So if your question is learning outcome 2 and it relates to chapters 2 and 3, make sure you've gone through both chapters in your answer and you've referred to both chapters in your answer. So ensure that your answer reflects the context of the question. So the questions that you get, you've probably seen this already, they relate to specific scenarios. They might talk about like a pretend business, XYZ brokers is one that you always see, isn't it? XYZ insurance. Facts and figures, they might put certain facts and figures in the questions. Just make sure that you refer to those in your answers. Pretend that they're a real thing, you know, that you're talking about. Ensure you answer all your questions. That might seem really obvious, but you can easily miss a question when you're going through them. So just make sure that they're all there before you submit your coursework. Address all issues raised in each question. It might be a really good idea to go through the question paper. This is something that I like to do with a highlighter. And in each question, just highlight any important things in the question that you might think are relevant. Because I'm sure you've probably seen this before, but the CII like to put things in that aren't relevant just to try and trip you up. So they might put some facts or figures in which are completely irrelevant, but they put it in there because you might think, oh, well, this must be important because it's in the question. However, sometimes it just doesn't matter. So get a highlighter, highlight any words, facts, figures, anything that you might think is important to the question. And then you're not going to trip up over the information that doesn't matter. Okay. So like we were saying before, they always use these words in the questions. Okay. This glossary is also in that specimen paper that we looked at before. So it's a breakdown of what all the main words in the questions mean. So if we just have a little look at identify and explain. So identify, recognize, and name. Explain, make something clear and easy to understand with reasoning and or justification. So they are quite different, and the marks that you will get for those could be quite different. So usually identify comes with less marks awarded to it than an explain question. because with an explain question, you need to explain things with a bit more detail. So there'd be more word count associated to that. So that's something really important to look at and highlight as well. I think we usually put it in, maybe in bold anyway, in your question, you know, what are they asking me to do? And then go to your glossary and see what the glossary says about that word. So it wants me to analyse. So if it wants me to analyse, then I know I'm going to have to find some facts about this and analyse those. I'm going to have to go to the book and find the facts, for example. Okay. So we covered at the beginning a little bit about the deadlines. So you get like a 6-month timer for your coursework with the CII. So if you go on revisionmate.com, as soon as you log in, I think it says there what date you need to submit your coursework by. Like I said before, please don't leave it to the last hour because you never know what might happen. And I think giving yourself a shorter deadline, 6 months is quite a long time, isn't it? And you might find that it gives you time to procrastinate about it and just feel like it's just dragging on. So set yourself a nice deadline that is going to work for you. Everyone's is going to be different, but you know, it's going to work for you. Keep the momentum up. And, you know, motivation can be a challenge, especially with something like this. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of work. It's not an easy task. But just break it down, you know, break down the questions like we broke down the reading of the book as well, like we spoke about before. You don't need to read that book in one sitting. You can just read it little bit by little bit when you're writing your coursework. So, for example, you might say this week, I'm going to read chapter 1 and complete question 1. And I'm going to finish that by Sunday night. And that gives you a little deadline then. It doesn't feel like I've got to do my coursework and I've got to finish it all. You've just got to finish that question. Okay. So set yourself smaller tasks. You're more likely to be motivated to complete it. So Sam, my boss Sam, she always says this thing in the webinars. How do you eat an elephant? I'd never heard this before until I met Sam. So can anyone put in the chat how you would tell me to eat an elephant? I know it sounds strange. What advice would you give me on eating an elephant? Not that I'd want to eat an elephant. Little and often, I like that one. Break it down into bites. With a knife and fork? Yeah, I suppose so. You need a big knife and fork. Yeah, medium rare. Stephen. Yeah. I'm more of a medium well myself, Stephen, to be honest. Yeah, one small piece at a time, exactly. So yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Just bit by bit. It seems like such a massive task when you get that question paper, but you know, don't be overcome by it. Just break it down into little bits. Okay. So sitting down at the table to eat a whole elephant is completely unrealistic. But if you take a little bit every day, you'll get there in the end. Okay. So if you give yourself a bit of time as well at the end, have a little break from it. So you finished your coursework, have a little break, drops of water make an ocean. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to use that one. Yeah, give yourself a little break, maybe a week or two, and then revisit your coursework and read it. Because if you read it straight away, it's just your mind's consumed with it. So take a little break and then read the coursework, and it'll be like you're looking at it with a new, fresh set of eyes. You know, just have a little break. And then this tick here is just to check it again. So have another little break and then check it again. So reread it again a few days later. And this is why I think it's worth having that little gap between when you finish your coursework and the day that it's due. So you've got that time to have a break from it, forget about it for a little bit, and then to check it. Yeah. So this is just a quick review of the key points that we've been over. Review, identify, highlight, consider, and apply. So review the learning outcomes. I've said it about 1 million times, but just make sure that you review those learning outcomes and you're looking at the right chapter for your question. Identify the issues, really important with law, like we spoke about. What laws are relevant to this scenario? What parts of the book are relevant to this scenario if you're doing something that's not law? Highlight the instructions in the question. Get your highlighter out. That's the first thing that I ever do when I get a question paper, is get a highlighter and highlight the important bits of the questions. Anything I think is significant. Consider, especially in law, consider the different viewpoints. Think about the grey areas. So with the insurance law, imagine that you're in court and this is in court. You know, what would the argument be? What would the argument for and against the situation be? That's good advice to take into M92 as well. And apply the law as identified appropriately. So yeah, always look at your case laws and what's relevant. So this is just a brief recap of what was in the the specimen paper, sorry, with the MO5 questions, simplified further. So like I said before, all the modules will fit this narrative, but it is slightly different with MO5, which is why I've highlighted that in this this webinar today. So step 1, identify. Step 2, explain. Step 3, apply. And then finally, conclude. Okay, so you can pick that out of your specimen paper and make sure you apply all those steps in your answers. So referencing. Has anyone got any questions, sorry, before I move on to referencing? Any questions about anything that we've covered so far? Or is everyone happy? Have a quick drink. Okay. If you submit before the deadline, will it be marked before? Good question. I don't know. I would say so. We'll see why not. Yeah, maybe it would get marked early. I don't think they'd wait until your submission date to mark it. And with the marking, it can take up to 40 days to be marked. Thank you for answering that for me. It can take up to 40 days to be marked. I've had it come back in 2 weeks before, and I've had to wait the full 40 days before. So sometimes it happens. On top of the coursework, revision work, how much longer would you leave yourself till you'll take the multiple choice exam? Personally, I submit it and then book my exam. I don't wait for the results to come back. I just book it in because it doesn't matter. You don't have to get that pass back before you can book your exam. Or, you know, it depends on what your schedule's like. If you think that if it comes back and you need extra work, if you fail and you think if I need to not redo this, but make amendments to it, it's going to take me a lot of time. I don't want my exam on top of that. Then you could wait until you get your results and then book the exam. That's up to you, Alex. There's no rules really around that. Yeah. I'll talk about what happens if you fail as well. Would you book it in as soon as possible after? As doing the coursework means you should. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was getting at before, Alex. When it comes to the end of your coursework, you should have everything you need to sit that exam because you've been through the book. The only thing you need to do is look at the multiple choice questions. So have a look on Revision Mate at the questions, have a look at a mock paper, just at the structure. Might be a little bit different to the certificate level, still multiple choice, but might be worded a little bit differently. So just the main thing after the coursework is then becoming familiar with the wording of the questions, I suppose. So I would book it in as soon as possible, definitely, while all the stuff is there fresh in your memory, definitely. So no problem, Alex. So with referencing, I mentioned before about how you might go somewhere else for information. You might need to have a look online or something, or you might read a book that's not the study text. So you should keep sort of a list of all those things that you do. Any websites that you visit, just make sure you copy and paste it into a Word document and save it. Any books that you read, you know, write down in Harvard style. There's no rule to say that you have to do wider reading with diploma. There is a reading list on the examination guide of books that you could consider if you want to develop a deeper understanding. Personally, I do like to do it for coursework, but that's because I like to develop a deeper understanding of topics. So I did a TikTok last week, I think it was, about a book that I used for M92, which was it's called Accounting for Non-Accountants. And it literally got me through that module, because accounting it's not my thing, to be honest. It's not my cup of tea. But that book really simplified the whole process for me. So that book then went into my referencing because it had helped me. And I had taken some concepts from it, put it in my own words, and put it into my coursework. So I had to put that in my referencing. So there's also a document on the CII website, which you'll find really useful about mixed assessment. Does anyone have any questions about referencing? Sorry, before I move on. There's some information about referencing on the CII website. They've got a really good video about it. It's under plagiarism. And this is basically how you reference. You've got your surname, title, publish year, page number. It's very straightforward, to be honest. It's nothing out of the ordinary. And when you go on to the CII website where we were before, if you look here under useful links and downloads, there's a plagiarism and how to avoid it video. If you click on that, it gives you some examples of how to reference as well. So they talk about it in there. You would need to reference your study text as well. I know it sounds really obvious, because obviously you've used that book, but put it in your referencing, just in case you pull anything out of it, word for word. So that's where that plagiarism document is. I'm going to put the link to this document in the chat, because I've no idea where it is on the CII website. I can't find it. So I'm just going to put it in here. So this is a document that the CII have produced about mixed assessment. It's relevant to all of these diploma units. To be fair, it's a really great document by the CII. They've really simplified everything. So it talks about how to approach your coursework, how to plan, tools that you should use. Again, talks about plagiarism, paraphrasing. There's also some examples of referencing in there. How to submit your coursework. And there's some information about your multiple choice exam as well, just in case you need to know more about that. And frequently asked questions. So if you have got any questions about the coursework itself, chances are it will be in here, because there's loads of stuff in there. Okay. So I spoke a little bit before about what we should do if you're not successful in your coursework. So hopefully this won't be the case, but in case it does happen, first of all, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to do the whole thing again, because the CII will give you a breakdown of what marks that they've awarded you against what marks were available. Okay, so it's really easy to see at first glance which questions you scored lower on, so you know what areas you need to rework. And all you do is rework the coursework that you've written already. Okay, so you don't need to rewrite the whole thing. You don't get new question set. You just look at what areas you've scored lowest on and go back in and just do a little bit of extra work. And then you have to purchase a resubmission from the CII and resubmit. Okay, so it's not a big thing. It's just a little bit of rework that you might have to do if that happens.